What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. This is episode 51. We're nearing the end of the first season. And so today we're going to talk about don't set goals. You'll be disappointed. That is our title that we're going with. And it's an interesting title, because I think goals we often think of as something we should strive for. But today we're going to talk about why maybe you shouldn't set them.
Yeah, screw those darn goals.
They're stupid goals that we've talked about every episode for the last fucking 50 things. Anyway.
Well, I mean, you can be wrong 50 episodes as long as you get it right on the 51st episode,
Well, isn't that what they say about success? It doesn't matter how many times you fail. It's just that one time that you succeed, right?
You just need one home run. That's it.
It's literally all you need.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you came up with this idea for this episode, right? You wanted to talk about goals. What was it about goals that you've been thinking about recently?
All right. So I got to this point. So like historically, I've had times in my life where I didn't have goals and it was very difficult to set goals. Okay. And then just recently, I got to a point where I achieved a whole bunch of goals and it was very satisfying. But at the same time, it was very unsatisfactory because some of these goals are like long-term things that you need to do. So like I achieved the beginning and now I'm in the middle of the goal where it's just like the routine day and day again. And then other things are like, I achieved this awesome thing that I thought I would do for the rest of my life. So what's the next waypoint? Like, right now, I don't know what the goals are. And it feels identical to that same spot where I was when like, I couldn't set goals because like, I couldn't see anything. Now I'm like, I've got everything I want. Like, what now? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought this up because I think this is something. Well, you kind of highlighted, I think, different stages of our lives, but it's also things all of us struggle with.
The days of our lives.
Know that, right? Yeah, they go on and on. It's that that the first being in that stage where you don't set goals and then having a hard time setting them. I mean, I think we've all been there. I know I've personally been there, right? Like when you get into that sort of rhythm and you're the type of person that doesn't set goals, it's really difficult to set them and then stick to them. But you also mentioned the other difficulties of one, achieving them and kind of being disappointed or let down. And two, kind of realizing them like you've started, you're that kind of person, but now you're kind of like, when you said that you're kind of in the middle, what I thought of too is like, really quickly, it made me think of like, when you exercise, when you first start working out, you hit all these like, you keep going up in weight, right? You keep adding 5 pounds on each side, or you keep, doing more reps, but invariably you will hit a plateau at some point. And that plateau, I mean, anybody who's exercised and worked out like seriously knows that plateau can go on for quite a while. And then it feels like, am I just maintaining this? Am I just going all this time just to keep this, or am I going to increase more? And it's like, I think that is a difficult point because it starts to feel like that hedonic treadmill, right? You get used to it. It starts to seem, why am I doing this? And yeah, so it can be really disappointing. So, all right, there's a lot to talk about then, I guess.
Yeah. And yeah. Like the interesting thing is that it's counterintuitive. So like when we set these goals, we set this if then like happiness fantasy where when I achieve this, then I'll be happy. And so like you set these goals and then you achieve them and then you're like, I'm happy, but I'm also somewhat disappointed.
Yeah. But I'm also actually kind of really disappointed. I think though, what you're bringing up though is actually a really important thing, which is, I think goals are crucial because we're creative beings, right? We're meaning makers. We need to be doing things in the world to realize our capabilities, our powers, to realize ourselves. But I think the other side of that too is though, you can't only have goals. Because I think, like we talked about this before, but like, it feels good to want stuff. We love fantasizing about what will happen when we get it. We love the expectation. And then we get it and it's like very quickly, we either move on to the next thing. We fail to celebrate, we fail to express gratitude. And I think gratitude's helpful in that sense to kind of keep you aware of what you actually have. But maybe it's also that you need, maybe this is also an indication that there's more to it beyond just goal satisfaction, right? That there's more to life beyond just endlessly achieving pursuits of various kinds.
Well, you kind of mentioned it there, like the sensory acuity of being able to feel the experience, like getting stuck in this treadmill of always going for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing you miss out on what you actually have. And so like last week, I got to this point where, like every day is pretty much routine. It's like Groundhog Day. I do the same stuff every day. And I was in this routine. I'm like, man, I'm not like moving forward fast enough. I'm not like seeing the progress. And then I was looking at all these activities. And I'm like, damn, that's exactly what I want to do. And that's exactly what I want to do. And that's exactly what I want to do. Like all this stuff is exactly what I want to do. But it's just like, I'm not seeing the progress as fast as I want to. Something's wrong. Blah, 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 blah.
Well, I think it is. I think it's the one side of its progress, right? Not seeing it accumulate fast enough and feeling like you're like stalled, even though you're doing what you want to do. The other side of it too is though, and it's funny you mentioned this because I was talking to somebody the other day about this, that, with the whole pandemic in the last year and a half, I have started to feel like my days are very similar. And it's like each day just bleeds into the next. Sometimes I'm not even positive what day of the week it is because it like almost doesn't matter. I'm doing the same stuff every day anyway. And it's like, and the routines are helpful, and I'm doing stuff that I want to do, but it starts to feel very like, like you're just in a hamster wheel, right? It just keeps spinning and you just keep going. And so I think what that also raises the issue of, I think it's also, why do you like doing these things? Why are you doing the things you want to do? And this is an important, what I mean by this is like, yeah, we have goals. So like, I might have a goal that I want to get this career because I want to make more money. But do I also like doing it for its own sake? Am I doing things that I like doing just for its own sake? And like, for instance, like I love writing and I like writing for its own sake. Now, it doesn't mean I always love writing every specific instance that I'm writing. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's really challenging. But I still like doing it because I like the act of doing it. I like the process. Or for instance, like learning something new. I love learning new things. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what the hell it is. I just like learning new stuff. So I like the act of learning, of expanding my mind, right? And by reminding myself that I like the process, it's not about the end. It's about that I like what I'm doing. I like the activity. That helps me sometimes appreciate more the things in my life and what I'm doing, not necessarily the goals. You can still celebrate the goals and they're still important because they're waypoints, they're markers that you've done X, right? Like, if you study real hard and pass a test, say on, I don't know, A plus, or something like that, it's a good marker that you did learn this stuff, you did accomplish something, and you move on to the next thing, right? So maybe like, why are you doing it? Is that part of, maybe something that would help?
Yeah, I definitely do have an addiction to learning. And so like
it's fun, isn't it?
dude, I freaking love it. And the crazy thing is that like there's these sayings like the more you learn, the more you earn. And at least in my life, that's held true. And it's just like, man, how can some people like not want to learn? It's like literally like you want money, but you don't want to learn. It's like you're shooting yourself in the foot.
It's funny. If we're going to talk about this for a second anyway, it's funny too, because I think, I noticed like, I mentioned it before, but like Nietzsche's book, Anti-Education and stuff, like he criticizes all the specialization, and we're seeing it more now than ever, right? And it's like, one of the things he said is like, when you specialize too much in school, you find that these people are very smart in very one specific thing, but they're not good citizens because they don't know enough about a lot of things to make informed judgments. And I think we're seeing that more and more where people, they want to learn, but they're only learning for that practical goal of like a career rather than learning because that's part of a human life, is that we can learn more. And when you learn more, you start to see different connections and you start to be able to apply these things in new ways and think differently. And I think that helps us also be better people in the world, right? Because we're more likely to understand other perspectives, other interests, so forth and so on, right?
It makes sense because when you specialize in one little niche, basically all you learn is what doesn't work. So you learn that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. Whereas like when you generalize, you can just form all these connections because you're like, well, this works over here, so why don't we try it over here? Or this works over here, and this. So it's kind of like a completely different mentality with what you're doing.
Oh yeah, and it's funny. Like I noticed, like Epicurus had made a clear connection between like our fears and our ignorance, right? And I think that's totally true. When you know a lot, even a lot about different things, but even just a little, you're less afraid of stuff and you're less afraid of new stuff because it's not so foreign, right? It might look different. It might involve some different type of thinking, but you've experienced that already in some other area. And so it's not scary. Whereas other people look at it and it's terrifying because they've specialized, right? It's hard to think differently. It's hard to think outside that box.
Yeah, there's that whole sunk cost fallacy too, where like, oh, you've dedicated your whole life to this thing and now you might have to make a shift. You know, when I was stopped being a veterinarian, everybody was always like, "But you went to so much school for it," and I'm like, "Yeah, I wasted years of my life. Then I don't need to waste the rest of it."
Oh, dude, it's so funny though. It's like because I am like I'm feeling the same way about teaching, right? Where it's like, do I even want to keep doing it in this world? And part of me, like I love it, but I don't necessarily. And it's like, but that's okay. You just move on. You do something else. It is what it is. But it's not. I don't think it's a waste unless you make it one.
Well, it's good that you bring that up because we're both approaching 40, and we mentioned that on like every show that
You
we're both
are. I
approaching
know.
40. Yeah, but
We should keep reminding people.
I was just reading about Abe Lincoln, and I know I mentioned him already in the episode today, but he
Yeah.
he was like a complete failure until he was 40. And nowadays it's like you can't be a complete failure until you're 40, that you've ruined your
Oh
whole
God,
life.
I know.
But
Right?
it's like why not just take until you're 40 to figure stuff out? Like free yourself. Everybody's like, you got to figure it out by the time you're a sophomore in high school, exactly where you're going to go to college, what you're going to major in, and it's just like, forget it. Just like mess around, screw stuff up, figure out, find your gift, find out what you're better than most people out with the least amount of effort, and then go after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny though. I think, you talk about this, like this getting back to the issue of goals. You talk about this issue of goals, and I think, that starts very early though, because of that pressure, right? That pressure to be successful, that pressure to have the house, to have the family, to have, this and that, to have all the objects that from other people can look at you and say, oh, they're doing well, right? To have your Instagram account and Facebook account displaying only happy things, right? All of this pressure to present ourselves a certain way is also makes us sort of pursue goals, I think, in a way that we look at them as achievements, not as adding to our lives. Maybe that's part of the problem, right? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because like part of what I do with my goal setting is I say, if anything is possible, what would I do? What would my day look like? And so now I have that day, and I'm kind of scared that I don't have like bigger, more badass goals, because it's like, I really enjoy what I do, and it's just like, but I don't want to get caught in that area of not having some type of goal, because a man without vision perishes, and like if I don't have some direction that I'm headed, eventually just get stagnant.
Yeah, but if you really like what you do, right? If you're really liking it and you love learning and you're still pursuing new things, you're still giving yourself time for new things, I don't think that's a worry. Because I think if you hit that point where that were to happen, you would shift to something new. I think the crucial thing is having new projects, keep learning, keep pushing yourself to try new things, because then you're always effectively in a position where you can shift if you need to, if you start to stagnate. But if you're enjoying what you're doing, there's no reason to just enjoy that you enjoy what you're doing. To
That's a good
enjoy
point.
that, especially if you have time. And that's what I meant by that. Like, looking at goals solely as achievements of something rather than as adding to our lives. Because, when we look at them as adding to our lives, if you've reached your goals and now you're in that middle point, you've effectively added something positive to your life, right? You've improved your life and now you can enjoy that.
Okay, so let me ask you a question then. I
Okay.
have put off buying a PlayStation for probably about 2 years now.
I'm well aware. Yeah, I
know. Because that's something that like I enjoy, but I know that if I start playing, there goes 2 hours of my day every day. And it's just like, I don't, striking that balance, because between like finding things that I just really enjoy doing and using that time for something more productive.
Well, look, I mean, let me ask you this. All right. All right, because I still have a PlayStation 4, if we're talking about that, right? And I didn't get a 5. And I'll be honest, I didn't get a 5 because I don't see the reason to yet. I may eventually.
Yeah, there is no reason to yet.
Yeah, no, yeah, really not. That said, though, I love the 4. But I mean, do I play? I like having, because honestly, I don't play video games often at all. Once in a while. Now, see, that's the thing, though. We have a Nintendo Switch too, and once in a while, I will get a game that I enjoy and I will play it. I look at it like reading a book. There's books that I read to learn. There's also books that I read just for fun, like fantasy books or science fiction. Now, I will happily devote 5 or 6 hours or 10 hours to finishing a really good book or whatever, however long it takes, right? And I break it up over days. I don't just sit there and plow through it all at once, right? And I think video games are the same thing. If they're really enjoyable, there's nothing wrong with it. It'd be problematic if that's all you did and you dropped out of other stuff. You stopped learning, you stopped doing everything else just to play, but you're not going to do that. So I mean, I think there's always a time and place where, just like, I think I mentioned you before, I love photography. It's like one of my favorite hobbies. I don't do it every day. I wish I could. I wish I could go all day and just take pictures. I do. I like it that much that I would literally just drive around finding new places and taking pictures. But I always try to set aside, like, I don't know if you remember when we did that book, The Artist Way, and she talked about having like those like artist dates. I always try and set myself like time each week, like an hour, to just go somewhere and take photos. Because it's like, to me, it makes my week better. And I know that. And I think if you can find those things, dude, it makes life awesome. What's wrong with that?
That I like what you say there, and something came into mind that, like, get the PlayStation, but keep it in the closet. Like that way when I want to play, I have it. I can play for a few hours when I have the time, but it's not there every day to kind of draw me away from the things that I think are more important.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like, it's like like I said, like, we have two systems, and like it's rare that I even get a game that I want to play, but there are a few that I really do want to play. And so when they come out, I don't hold back. I just get it. And I don't let myself play for 10 hours. I play a couple hours a day, and I, set aside, but you make time. But then when it's like that one game that you really wanted to play, once you're done it, it's great. And you put the thing back away for a while. You don't need to play it every day, but that way you can still enjoy it, right? I think that's just finding the relationship, the correct or the healthy relationship with the things we love, which is not easy.
striking that golden mean, man.
Yeah, it is. But I always hate when people like talk about like, they like talk about like a TV's a waste of time, or movies are a waste of time, or video games. You should just not do it, right? And it's like, well, that's stupid, because if you really like it, I love stories, but it doesn't mean I'm going to sit all day and do it. There's a huge distinction, right?
I also think that, I mean, and this is from what I've read in my own personal experience. So, like, granted, that's an N of one, fine. But like, I think that sometimes
generalize wildly.
I know, totally. I think that sometimes you have to like tip the scale very far in order to get in the direction of what you want. So, like, when I was struggling financially, I had to tip the scale very far to living a very lean life and investing in my future to be able to be a bit more comfortable financially. And like, I think sometimes with learning, it's the same thing, where like sometimes you just need to go all the way in order to kind of get that momentum that you want. So I don't remember what my point is, but there's
I like that point, though. It's a good point. Yeah, I think you're right, though. Sometimes, like with goals and stuff, and I think too, especially like what you had mentioned earlier about like achieving a goal and hitting that plateau. Sometimes you just have to throw yourself off in the deep end, though, to motivate yourself and really get to that, and when you're learning something new, especially, I think there's something people, learning on your own, a lot of people struggle with this, I think, because they don't know how to teach themselves, and they get frustrated quickly. And so like they don't really actually go any further than just the very beginning of a subject. And sometimes you need to give yourself a difficult project. Sometimes you need to just throw yourself fucking in it, because that's the only way to really muddle your way through and figure it out and actually learn how to do it. And because like you fail a lot in that process,
Yeah, and trying to strike the mean there too, because you have to go all in, but also you have to be persistent. Like, that's why so many people rely on learning from someone else, because class is there. They already paid for it. They have to go every Tuesday, even if they don't understand it, they have to go. But like when you're doing it yourself, there's not that forced persistence, and like that's a skill that you can actually learn and then apply it and be useful.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, right? That people like paying for classes because it gives them a schedule. It's like you can make the schedule yourself. You can do it so easily. And it's like, but yet there's not that external pressure, right? Of you have to do this, you have to submit the test, but you can do it yourself, no problem. And I think it's funny because like with goals, I think, it is this difficulty that I think a lot of things get disappointing very quickly. And it's true, because I think a lot of us too we tend to fantasize about really just object acquisition, right? Getting the newest, latest, greatest phone or laptop or newest video game console or whatever. And it's like, when that's what you're focused on and you're looking at those things only as having the latest and greatest, guess what? You're going to be disappointed super fast. Because if you're not asking yourself, why am I getting it? What do I actually want it for? What is it that I actually want to do with it? What do I want to use it for? And how am I going to maximize my benefit out of this thing? And then you can ask yourself serious questions of, is this goal even right for me? And I think, because I think that applies to everything in life, dude. Like when I think about my day, I try and do a lot of different things during the day because I have a lot of interests. And like, yeah, sometimes it's hard, but I think they're all important. And I think that's the difficulty, is finding those things that like still are adding value, not just getting it because you think it'll make you look or appear better, right? That's not really helpful.
Yeah, and then once you figure out what those things are, and once you start doing it, then it comes back to that sensory acuity, like actually experiencing yourself doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's so easy to get that thing and then be like, what's the next thing? As opposed to like get that thing and then actually experience it. I mean, you can experience it multiple times, which is awesome, because you can experience it while you're doing it. You can think about it later that day. You can think about it later that week. You can think about it over and over and over again. And so like, then you really get to savor these things that you've worked hard for, that you've sacrificed for, that you've, that, I think that's probably the benefit. That's the secret that I was looking for. Ta-da!
Ta-da, there it is. Yeah, it's funny how much I think it does come back to imagination. And because we all get caught up in these fantasies of wanting something. And I think sometimes you have to turn that imagination into other ends, right? Like you were just saying, instead of fantasizing about the next object, the next goal, thinking about how great it was, or how cool that problem was, how you overcame it, and really thinking about, kind of helping build yourself up too, and leveraging that for future things. Because I think we forget that too, that like a lot of times I think we forget that, we've done all these things in the past. We've overcome all these things, and we can use that imagination to also help us when we approach new obstacles and overcome new difficulties, right?
Definitely. And it gets you in such a better, like when you start thinking about these good things that happen that you've been working for and you finally got them and you got to enjoy. And even if it is superficial stuff, like even if it is the car that you got to drive or the phone that you got, or like, walking past people and feeling better than the Joneses, like even all these superficial things, if you can actually enjoy that, then you're winning. That's it.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's funny too, I think. But that's what I meant, like, knowing why you're getting it. Like, like, are you getting the newest video game console just because you want the PS5, just to have it, to say you have it? Or are you getting because you really do like certain games and you want to play them? I mean, I think there's nothing wrong. I love that. There's fun. So I think it's like, allowing yourself to also experience the pleasure, right? Allowing yourself to also be aware of why you find it enjoyable. Yeah, can help us. But it's funny because I think you're right, though. I think so many people struggle with that. We talked about that before, the hedonic treadmill, the disappointment with goals. Because I think we all do, we all wait so long for these things. And then we get them and we're like, damn, that's it. Now I got to do something else. Like, because, we talk, think, everybody's lazy.
Yeah, we think these goals are going to solve all of our problems. We think that once we get that, then everything will be solved. No more problems, no more worries, just sunshine and rainbows from here on out.
I know, it's the biggest fallacy, right? It's thinking that, getting this one thing will magically make us happy, will magically make us mentally healthy, will magically make us, better. And it's like, it doesn't. It's a whole thing you got to work on. So, yeah.
Yeah. So now that we talked about how goals are disappointing, I think we should give some people some instruction on how to actually set goals and, become disappointed, right?
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the best one. I told you this after I heard it. I was listening to this self-help guy, and he's like very well renowned. And he's like, setting goals comes down to figuring out what you want and writing it down. And I was like, damn, that's simple.
Yeah, that's literally
it. And yet there are whole sections of bookstores like all about setting goals.
To it.
And like we have all these goal setting models, and is it smart? Like all this stuff. And it's just like,
it's stupid.
Figure out what you want and write it down. Like, how simple could it be?
It's funny. It's like, it is true. That's all it is. Because I think, what people don't realize too is like, if you get yourself a journal, a goal journal, call it if you want, if that helps, and list your goals every day, what you start to realize very quickly is that, one, you start to figure out what you want. It's not at first. And that's the hard part, is at the beginning, I think you'll write down a bunch of random stuff that you may or may not really want. And you need to keep at it to figure out what you actually want. And that is the hard part, is figuring that out. But once you start to land on, that's what I really want, then what you find is after you've written them down, the planning process automatically kicks in. And I find that with myself. It's like you can't, once you've written it down, for some reason, you can't help but start planning. It's like there is this weird connection and relationship between this is what I want to get it. And then all of a sudden your brain's like, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah.
Right? How do we get that thing? It's amazing.
Yeah, it works so well.
Which is
and
why
like,
I think, yeah.
You do it in your spare time too, because you're like, these are the things I know I'm working towards. How am I going to get them?
Yeah. Well, it's funny too. I used to have that, I remember when I was depressed, I used to have that mindset of like, where like, oh, I'd have these things that I thought I wanted. And then I'd look around and be like, oh, it's going to take too much work. It's too impossible. There's no point. But then when you start really writing it down and start seeing that like it's little things, you realize that, oh, wait, no, I have an hour in the day I can set aside to do this, to learn this thing. And yeah, it might take, and that's the bigger question, right? It's like, yes, it might take me 5 years to learn what I need to make this happen. Is it something I really want? Because that is the question. Because for each goal I pursue, each thing I really honestly pursue, I'm also not going to pursue other things. Like I might be taking an hour out of my free time. So that means I can't hang out with people as well. Or I can't sit and watch Netflix for 4 hours. I can only watch it for 3 or whatever, right? It's like, I think but once you start doing that, you start committing more and more time because you realize that this is what I really want and it's worthwhile, right? My life will be better if I do this. I'll be better if I do this.
Well, I think that's a good point because we've both been there where we've been bummed with life and it's like difficult to find anything when it comes to a goal. Like people are just like, well, write down anything. You're like, I don't want to do anything. I hate my life, like Bob. And but it's like, I think in those times, what I've found is helpful is, well, what could get me excited? So instead of saying what will, because then there's too much responsibility if you're supposed to pick out something that will get you excited. Be like, what could get you excited? And it's like, oh, photo shoots with a bunch of scantily clad girls. I guess that could get me excited. So sure, why don't I put that down there? And it's like, how about getting that degree that's too expensive and probably worthless, but I've always wanted to do? Why don't I put that down there? And it's like, then you can start kind of moving because once you, like, if you notice those two things that just, came to mind briefly, but if you notice, you're going to have to be around other people to move to different locations in order to do those. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers with depression and being down is that people get stuck in their room, in their bed, in the same exact routines that they've been doing forever. And those routines are generally what causes them to feel the way that they do. I mean, we talked about how emotions and actions kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So like by figuring out what could get you excited and then starting to move in those directions, it completely disrupts whatever you're doing.
Well, no, it's true, right? You need to by writing those things down and starting to think that way, you're also forcing yourself to take a step, to take that first scary step. And even and I think we talked about this before too, even sometimes you just have to sit with the fear. You have to sit with the obstacle in your path until you overcome it. And it might take a while, but by doing that and by writing it down every day, you kind of you keep yourself motivated and focused.
And also there's a really good book called, I think, Learned Helplessness by Martin Seligman.
Oh, yeah.
And he has another one called Flourish. And so basically in animals, they showed that teaching an animal that it was helpless, that it couldn't actually do something, it would exhibit the same exact signs of depression. And so
the original experiment was with dogs where they shocked dogs through the floor with no way to escape. And at first the dogs jump around, they bark, they try and get out, they try and claw out, but eventually they just stop bothering. And they're just sad because it sucks, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So then once you start moving forward, you start to realize again that you can do stuff. Because when you're stuck there, you're like, oh, that's too hard. I can't do that. And you believe it.
Yeah.
But once you start trying it, then you're like, hey, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. I can do that. And all of a sudden, this whole learned helplessness thing disappears.
I'm really glad you. That's a big listen. When the reality is you can do it, but you have to show yourself first. You have to prove to yourself first that you can. And once you prove it, it's like the door's open. You realize you can do anything. And I think that's crucial. Yeah.
And plus you start building up more evidence.
Yeah.
Like you have this evidence, like you start. That's why I think that life doesn't even begin until you're 40. Like I seriously, the closer I get to 40, the closer I realize that life doesn't even
Yeah.
begin until 40. Because before then, you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. But like by the
Yeah.
time you're 40, you've messed up enough times, you've picked yourself up and brushed yourself off enough times that you have this evidence that, stuff's gonna happen. And then I can keep going. And like I pick myself up before, I'll pick myself up again. I'm going life is gonna be hard, but I can get through it. And like you start to really get these things that can help define you to actually live a very effective and meaningful life.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think like the whole writing down goals and stuff too, it keeps you sort of with that focus and that intention. It keeps you engaged in your own life. And I think that's the thing, because we start to sort of, when we shut down, we stop being engaged in our life. We stop believing we can do things. We stop believing we have the ability to be agents in the world, to take responsibility. We start blaming others. And that is really like, that is a sign of just like depression. I mean, really is what it is, right? And the only way out of that is to start moving forward, to start doing things. Yeah.
Boom. Boom. So time for
So
the
goals are
practical.
important.
Yeah, time for the practical tips. Goal setting crash course. Okay.
Yeah.
First thing. I'm just going to rattle off a whole bunch of things, and I guess you can too.
Okay, go do whatever you want to do.
First thing. First thing. Write down 100 goals. It's hard, but you can do it. Write down 100 goals. And then once you write those down, you'll start to be shocked at how fast they all start coming true. Second thing, write down every day, write down your 10 top goals with a time that you want to achieve them by. Every day.
I like that one a lot.
That's
Yeah.
what you were talking about earlier, how like in the beginning, you
Yeah.
don't know what they are. But then eventually you're writing the same things down every day, just reminding yourself every
Yeah.
morning, hey, this is what I'm working on in life.
Can I add to that too?
Yeah.
Importantly, don't when you're doing this, both of those things, don't intentionally limit the goals either. But you can imagine whatever you want. I think because people also have this tendency, especially at first, to be like, well, I'll be an assistant. And it's like, well, couldn't you be the executive? Right? Like, don't
no child in kindergarten. What are you gonna be? I'm gonna be an assistant to an accountant. Like, but yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. So like when setting goals, two very helpful scenarios that I have. One, or actually three scenarios. So one, if it was impossible to fail, what would I do?
Like
two,
yeah.
if anything was possible. So if money was no object, if time was no object, if connections were no object, what would I do? And then third thing is, if every job paid the same, what would I do?
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
I would also add too, which we talked about before, but if I was going to die in 6 months, what would I do?
That's a great
What would be the most important things to do now? Because I think the other side of this goal thing too is also regret. And what are you going to regret? Not doing, not trying. Because I'll tell you, there's lots of things in my life that I know I feel better having tried, even if I failed, than not doing it all. Right? That I'd much rather fail miserably and at least know that I did it, and at least know that I tried. Right? And I think that's crucial. The other thing I would add too is like, thinking about the fact that you look around the world, you see people doing stuff. We can all do whatever we want, and reminding yourself that over and over again through the goals that you set, that you're not limited. The limits you put on yourself there are limits that you're putting on yourself, right? There are fears, there are obstacles, things like that. There are beliefs, and you need to free yourself from those too. So I think that's important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said there about like not being stopped by the fear of failure, because it really, in the beginning, fear of failure is this huge thing. But then once you fail a few times and you pick yourself up and you brush yourself off and you keep going, you realize those are just learning opportunities. And guess what? You can fail 1,000,000 times and still succeed. Like you can mess your life up completely and get it back together. You can be divorced and still be fine. You can not have an education and still do just fine. And like, but all these people are afraid. They're like, what happens? And we talked about that in the last episode, like the fear of death. We literally associate the fear of death with failure. And it stops so many people.
It's fine too. I guess to say it differently too would be that like, you've never failed if you keep going. that's a better way, I think, even to say it, is that like all those failures, they're just bumps in the road. Like you haven't actually failed until you've actually stopped. Because you can just stop, you can just not do anything, and that you succeed at failing very quickly. If you keep going though, you've never failed. That's the important thing too.
It's really cool to get to that point where you don't even care about
Yeah.
failures anymore.
Yeah.
You're just like, I want this. I'm just going to keep going. That's like a really cool spot to be. So like, if you guys aren't there, I encourage you to find something that you want and just be like, hey, listen, I know I'm going to fail a whole bunch, but I really don't care because I want this thing. So I'm just going to keep going until I get it.
Well, it's funny too. I think once you start really focusing on goals and focusing on planning your own life, you stop worrying so much about other people, because you realize it doesn't matter, because you're starting to define what's valuable and what matters in your life rather than relying on others. Because when you rely on others, the only metric is to look outside and see what else they have and see if you have more. But when you're defining it yourself, nobody else matters because they have no way to make the comparison. There's no apples to apples in this case, right? So I think that's also important. When you get to that point where you're only comparing yourself to yourself, nobody else matters. Who cares?
And looking back at what you were previously, I'm guessing most of you are doing
Yeah.
a lot better now. So that's the
right.
important metric.
That's what matters.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
No, dude, I'm complete.
I'm good. I think that was good.
Yeah.
So, all right,
don't set goals, because you'll just get disappointed. Don't do it.
Yeah. So that was episode 51. Don't set goals, you'll get disappointed. Oh man, only one more to go in season 1. It's crazy. Anyway, so this is the Existential Stoic podcast. We'll be back midweek with a short, quick fix. If you guys check us out on YouTube, please subscribe, click notifications. That helps us out a lot. If you're listening on any podcast app, we're on all of them. Please subscribe. That also helps a lot. Share with your friends, share with your family, and come back and listen for when we do our quick fix midweek. Until then, though, it was fun. Later, Andy.
Later, Danny.